Mysteries of the Unexplained, Reader's Digest, 1984. I'm going to start over with spontaneous human combustion. It's a favorite of mine, and always found it very fascinating. Spontaneous human combustion. Spontaneous human combustion. It's a well-documented phenomenon in which a body ignites and burns without any known contact with an external source of fire. In some cases, the damage is slight. In others, the victim is reduced to ashes. And in some of the strangest cases nearby, objects escape relatively unscathed. The chair or bed on which the victim was sitting or lying, or even the clothes on the charred body, may be undamaged or slightly singed. Often, too, a single foot or a leg or the tip of some fingers remain intact, although the rest of the body is completely consumed. Cases of spontaneous human combustion began to appear in medical reports as far back as the 17th century, and by the 20th century, the literature abounded in detailed accounts of inexplicable human incineration. Over a span of 4 centuries, more than 200 such incidences have been reported. In earlier times, the classical targets of the fiery fate were believed to be alcoholic and usually corpulent elderly women who lived alone. They almost always incinerated outdoors on winter nights and were usually found near an open fire. Needless to say, there were no witnesses. Their deaths were attributed to God's punishment of their sins. But even in those days, there were exceptions, as some of the cases related in the chapters show. In fact, recent research in this strange phenomenon show a fairly equal representation of the sexes amongst the victims, with ages ranging from infancy to 114 years old. Many were abstemious and thin. Some have combusted in the proximity of source of fire, but others have ignited while they were driving or simply walking in a surrounding devoid of any external source fire. Contemporary scientific and medical opinion rejects the ideas of spontaneous combustion, dismissing that many instances of inexplicable deaths by burning and simply puzzling or unsolved. Although a number of theories have been proposed, there is no sound philosophical model that can explain just how a human body could possibly self-ignite, or how it could burn fiercely enough to be reduced to ashes. Such consumption of human tissue and bone is only possible at the extreme temperatures of over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, provided by a pressurized crematorium. And of course, it comes to explaining unscorched or clothing or a fully fleshed limb associated with the ashy, charred remains. The inexplicable becomes the bizarre. Now, before 1800, one of the earliest well-attested cases of spontaneous human combustion was recorded by Thomas Bartholomew in 1673. A poor woman of the people was mysteriously consumed by fire in Paris. She has been a heavy drinker of strong spirits to the point of not taking any nourishment for 3 days. One evening, she went to sleep on a straw pallet and was burned up during the night. In the morning, only her head and the ends of her fingers were found. All the rest of her body were reduced to ashes. The incident was recounted by Pierre Amalrier, who in 1800 published the first comprehensive essay on the subject of human combustion. American Medicine, April 22nd, 1905. An unusual, vivid, and detailed report of an inexplicable human incineration was given by Claude Nicolas Descartes, a physician serving as an apprentice surgeon in the Reims, France, where he stayed at a local inn. The innkeeper, Jean Millet, had a nagging wife who got drunk every day. On the night of February 19th, 1725, the inn was full of people in anticipation of a big fair that next day. Millet and his wife, Nicole, retired early. Millet could not sleep and got up to go downstairs into the kitchen, probably to follow her usual habit of drinking herself insensible in front of a warm fire. Her husband fell asleep, but around 2 o'clock in the morning, he woke up with a start. He smelled fire and rushed downstairs, banging on doors along the way to wake up any sleeping guests. When the panic group arrived in the big kitchen, what they found burning was not the inn, but the innkeeper's wife. She was lying close to the fireplace and was almost totally consumed by the fire. Only part of her head, her lower limbs, and a few vertebrae remained. Small section of the floor under the body has been burned through, and the chair she usually sat on next to the fireplace was slightly scorched, but nothing else in the room was even touched by fire. A police lieutenant, accompanied by 2 gendarmes, were making his rounds when he heard the commotion from the inn. He quickly went inside, saw the smoldering remains, and promptly arrested Jean Millet on the suspicion of murder. It was well known that Millet was not a drunkard, but a shrew who had made life miserable for her hard-working husband. The suspicion around town was Jean desperately wanted to be rid of his wife so that he could marry a servant girl who worked at the inn. The charges leveled against him were that the innkeeper had poured the remaining contents of the liquor bottle all over the body of Nicole Millet, who was presumably unconscious by then, desperately set her on fire, and then tried to make it look like an accident. Lescat, the young physician, was amongst those who had rushed downstairs and seen the charred body of Millet during the court proceedings that followed. He did testify in behalf of the innkeeper. He stated that he did not believe any human agency could account for the total combustion of the unfortunate victim's body, so that only the skulls and extremities remained in such a way as to leave nearby objects unburned. The court proceedings were very, very heated, and the prosecution insisted that Jean Millet was a murderer. He was declared guilty and condemned to death. However, Lescat's repeated testimony that this was not been a normal fire, and it was instead a visitation from God. Finally persuade the court, Jean Millet's sentence was reversed, and he was released. But by then, the poor man's life was ruined. Deeply depressed, he lived the rest of his years in a hospital. Good times. Good times. And that's just one case before 1800.
Poltergeist and PK. One of the best known of all psychic phenomena is that of the poltergeist, whose activities have been chronicled since ancient times. Literally translated from the German, the words polter and geist meaning racketing ghost, and this well-documented category of ghost intervention is never a quiet one. The activities of the rambunctious poltergeist typically include knockings, rappings, heavy trampling, the setting of fires, the hurling of stones, the other objects, the breaking of crockery, the banging of doors, the jiggling of latches, and the opening of windows and dresser drawers, the overturning and displacement of furniture, and the shaking and levitation of beds and their occupants. Some poltergeists have been known to sob, moan, and scream. As these mischievous, attention-getting, and sometimes malicious tricks would suggest, the poltergeist is almost invariably linked to the presence in the house of one specific young person, usually an adolescent boy or girl. In the Manning case, The poltergeist was associated with 11-year-old Matthew and one of his 3 children in the household in 1967 when the manifestations began. The disturbances, which consistently chiefly of the knockings and the movement of furniture and objects, ceased when Matthew was away and resumed when he returned. Eventually, the poltergeist followed him to his boarding school. It was not until 1971 when Matthew apparently siphoned the energy of force behind these manifestations into his developing artistic and psychic skills that the poltergeist finally retreated. It should be noted that the Manning poltergeist was unusually tenacious. Few visitations continued longer than 2 months. Although research has shown some poltergeist cases to be fraudulent, investigators have found enough instances above suspicion to convince them that the poltergeist is a true psychic phenomenon, ungoverned by normal psychic laws. Evidence suggests that the manifestations of the poltergeists are produced by bursts of psychic activity emanating from its agent, that one person whose presence is always required. Attempting to understand the forces at work, researchers in parapsychology have hypothesized that poltergeist feats in moving objects, which are often seem to fly in violation of the laws of gravity, gliding, rising, and turning corners, are examples of psychokinesis or PK. Psychokinesis or PK, the ability to influence inanimate objects by mind power. The most widely known examples of alleged psychokinesis are those of Uri Geller, but these have now been largely dismissed as fraudulent. For example, one well-known magician said that Geller used a palm magnet to stop a watch. A less known but possibly more convincing example of PK is a Russian woman who was named Nina Kalugina. Her ability to move and otherwise affect small objects without physical contact has been witnessed by Western parapsychologists, but have never been extensively tested under the rigorous laboratory conditions in the West, and her feats have not been scrutinized by professional magicians. The deficiency of the PK theory as an explanation of poltergeist phenomena, however, is that the energy involved in many poltergeist disturbances far exceed anything claimed by the supporters of Kalugina and other PK adepts. The best they can do is to move to a small object such as a fountain pen, or whereas the poltergeist can cause crockery to fly across a room. In view of this, some researchers have cast about for a source of energy that might be utilized by poltergeists. But so far, their attempts to explain poltergeist phenomena have simply replaced one mystery with another. Even more mysterious is why any spirit or being that could marshal such remarkable psychic energy should expend it on such purposeless activities. Mind creatures. Creatures of the mind exist in a variety of forms. There is that remarkable population of lifelike entities that inhabit the world of dreams. And then there are convincing make-believe playmates, sometimes of long duration, that many children create for themselves. This is not to mention that reported menagerie of visions induced by drugs and alcohol. These manifestations are subject and not perceived by others. There are, however, apparitions that make public appearances. Some of these are said to be the perceptual double, the etheric counterpart of a living person who is undergoing an out-of-body experience. Even more mysterious are the externalized perceptionable manifestations of some whose existence originated in the mind of the creator by virtue of that person's incredible powers of concentration, visualization, and other more occult efforts in mind. In Tibet, where things are practiced, a ghost of this kind is called a tulpa. A tulpa is usually produced by a skillful magician or yogi, although in some cases is it said to arise from the collective imagination of superstitious villagers, say, or travelers passing through some sinister tract of country. A tulpa, the Tibetans claim, may sometimes be so vigorous as to produce its own secondary emanation, known as a yang tul, and this may in turn produce an emanation of the third degree, a Nying tul. Adepts able to originate such multiple manifestations are rare and are usually found amongst the Buddhist saints or bodhisattvas. Some are able to produce 10 different kinds of tulpa. These include apparently animal beings, whether human, animal, or supernatural, and those emanations also appear in the dreams of whoever the bodhisattva intends to help. Few Westerners have had an opportunity to investigate the apparently fanciful Tibetan claims outlined above. One who did was French scholar and traveler Alexandre David Neil. He spent 14 years in Tibet and studied the doctrines of Tantric Buddhism with a number of eminent lamas. The only woman lama at the time, well, she was widely honored for her contribution to understanding of Tibetan thought. She later published 2 accounts of her experiences in that remote and little-known country. The following description of her own experience with the tulpa is taken from her book Magic and the Mystery in Tibet. Besides having had few opportunities of seeing thought forms, my habitual incredulity led me to make experiments for myself, and my efforts were attended with some success. I chose for my experiment a most insignificant character, a monk, short and fat, of an innocent and jolly type. I shut myself in psalms, it's a type of meditative seclusion, and I proceeded to perform the prescribed concentration of thought and other rites. After a few months, the phantom monk was formed. His form grew gradually fixed and lifelike looking. He became a king, a kind of guest, living in my apartment. I then broke my seclusion and started for a tour with my servants and tents. The monks included himself in the party. Though I lived in the open, riding on horseback for miles each day, the illusion persisted. I saw that fat Trapa, novice monk, is what Trapa is, now and then, and it was not necessarily for me to think of him to make him appear. The phantom performed various actions of the kind that are not natural to travelers and that I had not commanded. For instance, he walked, stopped, looked around him. The illusion was mostly visual, but sometimes I felt as if a robe was lightly rubbing against me, and once a hand seemed to touch my shoulder. The features which I had imagined, which, building my phantom, gradually underwent a change. The fat, chubby-cheeked fellow grew leaner. His face assumed a vaguely mocking, sly, malignant look. He became more troublesome and bold, and in brief, he escaped my control. Once, a herdsman who brought me a present of butter saw the tulpa in my tent and took it for a live llama. I ought to have let out the phenomenon and follow its course, but the presence of that unwanted companion began to provide trying to my nerves. It turned into a day nightmare. Moreover, I was going to Lhasa, and so I decided to dissolve the phantom. I succeeded, but only after 6 months of hard struggle. My mind creature was a tenacious of life. That's the Tulpa.
That was about 3 stories in 20 minutes. Single read. I flipped around in the book to try to find some good ones. Maybe next video I'll have some betters. Stay tuned, I'll make a couple more. Thanks for following on the mysteries of the unexplained. Thanks a lot. Be good humans.